This is lesson 2.14, the Stono Rebellion in Fort Mose. In this lesson, we're going to look closely at Florida, which was under Spanish control during the 17th and 18th centuries, and which offered asylum or protection for enslaved people, largely for religious reasons, with major consequences to the British colonies further north. So let's take a step back to way back in the 1500s when the Spanish were first exploring and colonizing the Americas. I'm sure you remember Juan Garrido, the Congolese conquistador who accompanied the earliest Spanish expeditions and is believed to have been the first African to set foot in the Americas. In 1513, he joined in the exploration of what the Spanish called La Florida, which is, of course, now the state of Florida. A few decades later, the Spanish had built a city there called St. Augustine. St. Augustine was the first town in what is now the United States that was officially sanctioned by the government as a community for free black people as well as Europeans. Ladinos, like Juan Garrido, would have made up its black population. Remember that St. Augustine is there while we take a quick detour over to Germany, where some crazy stuff was going down at around the same time. So here we are in 16th century Europe, where everyone is religiously united under the Catholic Church, and they all believe the same things and practice their religion the same way. The Catholic Church has a very clear power structure, and it's led by a chief cleric called the Pope. This had worked pretty well for about 1200 years until this one German monk decided to cause trouble. His name was Martin Luther, and he was about to throw some serious shots at the Pope. So what happened was, in 1517, Martin Luther went to his local Catholic church in Wittenberg, Germany, and he nailed a document to the door on which he had written a lengthy argument known as the 95 Theses. We don't need to go into his arguments in detail, but the gist of it was that the Pope is a liar and a thief, and no Christian needs to listen to him to get into heaven. Well, unsurprisingly, the Pope and his followers were pretty irritated by this, and they went after Luther, who had to go into hiding. But Luther had followers of his own, and soon people all over Northern Europe took his advice and left the Catholic Church to pursue their Christian faith in their own way. This movement absolutely rocked the Christian religion in Europe, and it's called the Protestant Reformation. Protestant because it started with a protest against the Pope's authority, and Reformation because it reformed the religious landscape of Europe. The next 100 years or so were unspeakably bloody as religious violence and war engulfed the continent. And when the dust settled, Western Europe was divided into a mostly Catholic South and a mostly Protestant North. What's important here is that Spain is in the Catholic part and England is in the Protestant part, which made the Spanish and the English bitter enemies, largely for religious reasons. Now, let's go back to colonial North America in the 18th century, where the English and their hated rivals, the Spanish, are literally next door neighbors. And there's St. Augustine, which has grown into the largest Black and European settlement in the region. So the Catholic Spanish, who hate the Protestant English, make it very clear that they don't enslave other Catholics, regardless of their race. And they offer asylum or protection to any enslaved people in the English colonies who can make it into Spanish territory as long as they convert to the Catholic faith. Obviously, this attracts a lot of enslaved people who start to run away and try to get to Florida. Perhaps anticipating armed conflict with their northern neighbors, the Spanish also built fortified military outposts, the most famous of which was called Fort Mose, which was built in 1738. In the tradition of putting black Ladinos in charge of military operations, the Spanish assigned command of Fort Mose to Francisco Menendez, who had already distinguished himself in battle against the British during the Yamasee War 2 decades earlier. The following year, in 1739, a group of enslaved people in South Carolina got word that the Spanish were offering asylum to refugees, and a major rebellion broke out. It was called the Stono Rebellion, and it was led by a Congolese Catholic from what is now Angola named Jemmy. Jemmy and a few others managed to steal some guns, and they marched south, burning plantations and slaying enslavers as they went. At one point, they were joined by as many as 100 people, but they were eventually confronted by an armed militia. Some were killed and others escaped into the forest. It is unknown whether Jemmy survived the skirmish and eventually made it to Florida. What is known is that the following year, South Carolina passed the most restrictive slave code yet, with the aim of preventing future uprisings like the Stono Rebellion, which is remembered as the largest armed rebellion in the history of colonial North America. The following month, the British invaded Florida and destroyed Fort Mose. But St. Augustine continued to offer asylum to fugitive slaves until 1821, when Florida became a territory of the United States.